absolute pleasure. I've never seen so much beauty in one room in all my life. Gentlemen, you should be very lucky if you're sitting among these beauties, believe me. Oh, there we are. Perfect. Well, it's an absolute pleasure, as I said, to be here. Well, my life is very busy. I'm the youngest of 13 kids. We grew up in the ghettos, and it was very interesting because most of the time I heard people say I was born on the right time but on the wrong street. And I thought something's wrong with this, because I always felt I was born on the right time on the right street, because it certainly taught you how to share. And it was very interesting because I'll tell you a few stories as I grew up. I remember my mother coming home in the middle of the winter time with no coat. And I said, Mom, where's your coat? Somebody else needed it more than I did. And I tell you what, it was amazing. I have never forgot the look on her face. So it was quite interesting. And another problem we had, we never took out the young ladies in our neighborhood because they were as poor as we were. So we went into the Sandy Hill, you know, where all the big houses were. We tried to meet the charming young ladies there. But after you took them to the movies twice, the parents would invite you for dinner because they want to know who the daughter's going with, okay? So it's great. And you're being invited with 37 pieces of cutlery. We had a fork and knife which we hid so we can have it for the next meal. Anyways, we had this great dinner, and remember, my father was a shoemaker. We had to share. So anyways, everything was fine, and they were warning you that be careful because the father's going to ask you what your father does. So anyways, I got through the dinner, so I was doing quite well, and then the dessert came, and I'm just picking up my fork to have some dessert. And the gentleman says, the father says, what does your father do? And I thought immediately, if I said he's a shoemaker, I'm not going to have time to finish the dessert. So I said he was a soul saver. So I managed to get through that and enjoy the dessert and live happily ever after. But, you know, I've always ran my life when I grew up and started the deli and thought it was time to pay back because I was very fortunate. We came from a large family, and it was a great experience. As I say, sharing was something we did. My father had the shoemaker shop with the kitchen behind. We always had a pot of something on the table because people would come off the street, and he'd just guide them towards the kitchen and said, if you want something thicker, just go deeper into the pot. So it was sharing, and that's how you survive. Soles and heels were 50 cents, and that was a lot of money. You used to buy a lot of food in the market for that. So they'd come in with 10 or 15 cents and cabbages and carrots and whatever the case might be, and we horse traded, so we survived. But it gave me a great amount of experience because I said, well, I'm going to go out and take a bite out of the world, and what can I do? Whose life can I change? Because I was very fortunate to have mentors. So I always said, well, just before I would go out and look in the mirror and see if everything was straight, I said, whose life I would change today? And that's important. A very good expression in Hebrew is a mitzvah. And a mitzvah is, what can you do? Whose life can you change? So this is the way I guided myself. So anyways, the deli was open in '59, and about, I would say, less than a year, I said it was time to pay back. And I was looking around for things to do and whose life I can change. But I'm the lone cowboy. I kind of do things and then put it together. So then, as I say, I had the deli and the steakhouse, and the phone rang one night, and I said, the place next door, David speaking, and this gentleman says, how can I tell if my son's friend is on drugs? And that took me a split second to realize he was talking about his son and certainly not the friend. I said, I can't answer you, but we'll have a 15-minute conversation, which we did, and that was a Tuesday. I will never forget it. And Thursday, I was at a high school talking about careers in the auditorium, and at the end of my conversation, I said I was triggered the other night from a parent that was talking about a son's problem. I was hiding behind the fence of substance abuse among our teens. Would somebody's come down to the front of the auditorium, and about 50 kids came forward before I had my tush on this stage and my legs hanging over. Oh yeah, I lost a younger brother with overdose, and that's all. The hair on my head was standing straight up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, folks. The next day I went out to talk to school teachers and principal, and there was about 4,000 kids that were in trouble with substance abuse. and no place to get treated in the city. You had to go to the American side, and if your family didn't have the upfront money, the poor kid didn't have a chance. I said, we've got to do something about it. I was catering at that time in the Parliament buildings for many, many years, and many of them knew me. I said, can I use the front of the Parliament buildings? And they explained, all day would be a pleasure. We'll put a microphone out there and so forth. I went to CFRA and I advertised. To make a long story short, 450 kids showed up in front of Parliament buildings on a Saturday morning. I had 3 members of Parliament, which I introduced. And I said, your names are not important, but your stories are. These kids got up and identified themselves, and the horror stories we were hearing, it was unbearable. I'm telling you, it was the saddest thing I ever had to listen to. I got up in the mic and I said, there will be a treatment center. So I set off to see this lady in Toronto who I made the connection with. I'm there in her office for about 30 seconds. She said, well, would you do me a favor? And I thought, boy, I'm getting somewhere here. I said, it's an absolute pleasure. She said, take a walk off a short pier and stop giving me a hard time. Well, I said, madam, I'll do that for you, but the only problem is you're going to trip over me when you go in and out of your office. I'm not giving up on this one. We went back and forth and back and forth. I wasn't getting anywhere. Finally, I called my nephew who was in the real estate business, and I said, Nathan, I need a building, a great building to turn this into a treatment center. So he found me the one on Bronson, which is the first one we have, and it's 20 years now I've been doing this. Anyways, I bought the building and I phoned her one more time and I said, let's you and I have our last meeting. If we don't get along, then I will definitely get out of your face. Well, she had nothing to lose, but I had the bill of sale. But before I had to do that, remember, getting a treatment center in your neighborhood, the neighbors were all ready to write checks and tell you to go 10 miles down the road. But I never ate so many cookies and donuts in 3.5 months, convincing them there's going to be no fences, no locked doors, no bars in the windows, no police bringing kids in handcuffs. So finally I convinced them, and they were donating money. So I got the neighborhood to accept the idea it was going to be a treatment center. Now I had to deal with this lady in Toronto. So as I say, I went off to Toronto and I had the bill of sale. And as soon as I walked into her office, I just pushed this almost right in front of her face. And she looked at me and she just stared at me. She says, you got 90 days to open up your center. That's it, our meeting is over. Well, she could have knocked me over with a feather. But you can rest assured when we were cutting the ribbon and opening the center, she was there front and center. I wanted a residential, but she gave me a daycare, but it was, at least we had something to start with. But when she got there and was cutting the ribbon after the ribbon cutting ceremony, I pulled her aside and I said, you know, you gave me a hard time at the beginning and your mind just changed like that. She says, well, when you put your money where your mouth is, she says, I knew how serious you were. If I would have given you a building, remember, Kingston would have wanted one, Toronto would have wanted one, every place would have wanted one. You would have given me such a hard time. But anyways, I lived with the daycare, and it was great because it was something. We had something there. We were getting some great results with the kids. But every member of Parliament that I would run into absolutely used to cross the street when they see me coming, because I was almost putting my hands right around their throat and saying, why are you making me put those kids back on the street at 4 o'clock? Why don't we have a residential? It's the only way I can do a proper job of treating them. So anyways, finally it did happen. Dalton McGinty had a press conference and called me a few years back. And I was sitting in the room, I was wondering why I was there, and finally he called my name. I went up to the front and he said, David, you will get your residential treatment center. Here's your license. Well, I was so overwhelmed. Now we have one off the Carp Road and one in Carlton Place, and we use the Bronson Center as an aftercare. But now I bought another 25 acres of land from the Royal Ottawa. We're going to build a brand new facility. Not one family pays a nickel to get treated, folks. We have school teachers, thank you. We have school teachers in there. The kids get their schooling as well as their treatment. So when they certainly graduate, and I tell you, when the graduation happens, the grandmother's there, the parents are there, their siblings are there. It's so emotional, because when we get that kid, believe me, she doesn't know what planet she's on. But you can't believe how we can change their lives in 3 months. and how we can get them back into university or school or wherever they've been going at the time of that before they got themselves in trouble. So, but what I said after that, I then put my board of directors together because I didn't want to sit with 12 people at a table and somebody say to me, David, you're beating your head against the wall, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? So I wanted to make sure it happened, and when it was happening, then when it finally came out of the ground, I said, then we'll put my board of directors. The same thing, I was invited to MacArthur High School. That was quite an interesting thing. About 17 years ago, I was sitting there with 300 other people, and this doctor, I can't remember his name, was getting up and ranting and raving and ranting and raving about the high-tech, the high-tech, the high-tech. Finally, I couldn't take him anymore, and I stood up and I said, hold on, Doc. If we don't talk about high-tech, you're not going to have the tradespeople to build your buildings to put your high-tech in. Well, the crowd responded, and they knew I was right, but I sat down and I didn't want to cause a riot. So anyway, but when I was leaving the school, when the breakfast was over, the principal ran after me and said, David, you got to help me. They're going to close my school. And I turned around and looked at him and I said, you know what, I don't think this is going to happen. He was shocked at my answer, because you got to understand, MacArthur High School was a drop-off school. Any kid that had trouble learning was dropped off at MacArthur Road, but the teachers were so passionate. I left there and I went to Pinecrest to see Jim Greaves, who was the head of the school board, and I said, Jim, you can't close MacArthur High School. He said, David, I haven't got $10 in my budget for that school. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll do a fundraiser and we'll put that school back in shape, but what we'll do is turn it into a trade school, because not every kid is going to be a doctor or a lawyer, but they're going to make great plumbers and bricklayers and framers and gyprockers. Well, he couldn't just threw his arms around me. He said, I'll support that. I drove back to the school and ran into the principal's office and picked up the microphone and said, all the teachers in the school teachers' lounge, just tell your kids you'll be back in about 10 minutes. So they all come running in because they were curious about the strange voice. I said, we have a chance to save the school. Everybody make a wish list for what you need. List everything in your apartment, screwdrivers, wrenches, lathes, whatever the case might be, welding equipment, whatever it is. So to make a long story short, there was 42 wish lists in the cafeteria. We sent out 600 invitations and 502 people showed up. Then I went into the pitch of how important it is to turn this school into a trade school. Well, the first night I raised $360,000. The next day, my phone rang and voice again said, we heard what you did last night. That was unbelievable. We want to put in the full automatic paint shop, and that was General Motors. So, and then we had the welding shop donated. So between kind and cash, we raised $1.5 million and put 22 shops in there. From bricklaying to plumbing to electric to framing to gyprocking, small motors and rug laying and hardwood floor and tile laying. As I say, you know, we have to have tradespeople, folks. Why are we bringing people from other parts of the world when we can train our own young people right here? You know? I'm working up in Thunder Bay. Now that is a total disaster area. I've been working up in the Thunder Bay area for 5 years looking for a great location. And finally, I got a call from a chap from Chicago. He said, I got exactly what you're looking for. So I flew back up to Thunder Bay. We drove 170 kilometers west of Thunder Bay. And there it was, 100 bedrooms, a full dining room, a wastewater system, a freshwater system. Now I'm trying to turn that into a training center for the native kids. Folks, 2 weeks ago I was in Thunder Bay at a school meeting, and the teacher was sitting beside me and her cell phone rang. When she answered the phone, she turned absolutely white. And I looked at her and I said, how many this time? She said, 2 kids, 15 and 16-year-old hung themselves. Last month, 7 kids suicide, and I'm screaming at the chiefs. What's the cost of doing nothing? You can't, folks. You've got to do something with your youngsters. You've got to motivate them. So now what we're doing, first of all, what I was thinking about the center is turning it into a whole trade center and teach them on heavy equipment and all the other things, because that Ring of Fire is going to be the biggest mining area in the world. They need 100,000 employees. There's nothing there but a humongous piece of land. And there's diamonds and golds and zinc. There's so much metal in the ground. As I say, it's going to be the biggest mining area. But then the problem with these kids committing suicide, we can't avoid that. We got to get them motivated and get them straightened out. So if all goes well, I'm meeting with members of Parliament. I was at Parliament all day yesterday, and then this afternoon I'm meeting with John Baird and the rest of the heavies to listen to my story. So we're going to put half of the center into treatment and the other half into training, so we can kind of motivate the other kids and kind of shift them to the other side after a while. That's another program. Then I had the opportunity to tour Africa, and what I saw was god-awful, folks. The cities are fine, but when I said I want to go to the rural area, take me out to the rural area. When you go to a clinic or a hospital, if he has 2 boxes of aspirins, he's lucky. So now, as you heard me say, we're up to 40 containers of medical supplies that we ship to all over Africa, but I concentrate on the rural area. So we've got to make a difference. I've always said, if each one of us in this room can change one person's life, you know, it would be a miracle. See, the good Lord did a good job, okay? Now, being in the fundraiser business, you've got to understand this. It's very important. He made so many guitarists and singers and football players and all the other things. And then he made this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful group of people who are volunteers. And then he made this other group of people that don't want to get involved, but they write checks. So you see, I concentrate on the ones that don't want to get involved because they can make all the other things happen, okay? So they write their checks, I'll phone them and I'll say, Jerry, come on, I've got a fundraiser, you got to help me. No, David, I can't be bothered, you know me. Your check will be in the mail, or come and pick it up. So you need this group. So he really divided us up in great categories where we can get a lot accomplished. It's just amazing how the city is so generous when it comes to helping and reaching out to other people. It's important because, you know, you got to share. It's so important. People can survive if we share, and that's a motive that I've learned this since I was a kid. So, you know, doing this kind of work, it's very interesting. The people you meet and the people you motivate is, my whole dream is to take these young kids that have real problems and motivate them and change their lives. So training schools are important. As I say, we got to teach them skills. And I'm going to really concentrate with the native kids, because if you go up to their reserve, it's the saddest thing we ever saw. Like, we've got third world countries in our own country, right in their own backyard, folks, which we got to change their lives. We got to do something for them. We've got to stop with the suicides. The things that they're taking, sniffing gasoline and sniffing glue, and now they're drinking antifreeze. Now, I'm having the same problem with the treatment center, because you see what's happening. The pushers on the street give drugs to the kids free. And when the kids get hooked, you know they're going to go into crime to get money to buy the stuff. It's just awful. It's just terrible. And the other things the kids are doing today, they're going into their parents' medicine cabinet and taking a handful of whatever pills there is there. They meet as a group, and they throw the stuff in a bowl and mix it up, and then they just take some and just pop it in their mouth. They could be taking OxyContin and heart pills, any kind of stuff. It's just, you know, we've got to get a message out there. It's so important. We've got to motivate these kids to say, hey, you know, you're putting yourself so close to death. And when you're sniffing gasoline and glue, I mean, you're frying your brains. You can't function after that, you know. So we won't give up on that process, I tell you that. I'm like a dog with a bone, I won't let go. We'll still work on it, you know. So, you know, I've been very fortunate, as I say, we've been very lucky in the years of raising $150 million to change people's lives, because it does take, you know, you got to plant the seed. I was very interesting, Scott and I, the other night was at a peace conference, and you know, this is something that we have to reach out, is to try to get peace in this world, because I went over to Israel, as I said, I went over to Lebanon, and when you go to the grave sites and you see 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old in the grave on both sides of the fence, It's the backbone of the community, so peace has to be very important. We have to talk about it, we have to spread the word. There's got to be a compromise somewhere. Somewhere we can live in peace, because it's what's happening. We're all sitting on a time bomb in this world. It's just every part of the world that you think of, they're fighting for some reason whatsoever, but it's time to sort of wave the flag of victory and say, hey, let's all come down. You know, we can't communicate through guns, and we can't communicate through fists. We got to talk and sit down and discuss, and there's a happy medium somewhere among us. So let's see if we can talk about peace. But it's, you know, it's an absolute pleasure, folks. You know, when you have the opportunity to come and talk to people and share your stories, because you hope you can motivate other people to get on board and change somebody else's life. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.